Hello and welcome to John and James Live. My name is John Hastings. I'm with my co-host, Mr. James Selo. And today, James Selo, we're taking 4 controversial takes and disseminating them and putting it out there, James. You might not
4.
agree. 4. It was going to be 3, but I just added another one in there. So what have we got?
You've thrown me a curveball there, mate. I was banking on 3, and you chucked another one in for good measure.
List them out, James. Have you got them in front of you?
No.
Okay, number 1 controversial take we'll be discussing: businesses do not solve problems.
That's controversial.
Take number 1. Number 2, all nations will be bankrupt. I've got data on this, James. I've got the data.
By the way,
Number 3, most of modern exercise is bad for your health. You know, as we're personal trainers, this will ruffle a few feathers and wind a few people up. But again, I have the data and the logic behind this one.
I love the data.
4th, final one: genders will merge into one. I was going to put everybody was going to be transgender, but that's not quite what we're saying, because that's trans is when you're one gender and then you transition into another. What I'm putting out there is that the trajectory is that genders are going to merge, and we'll look at the short-term data on that and we'll project into the long-term trajectory about where that's going. James, we might disagree. These are controversial takes. We'll argue both sides, but I'm going to make a strong argument, and then you guys out there are going to see who wins. Because I like
my arguments are not going to be based in data.
I don't rely on raw emotion.
I don't rely on things like data. I mean, you know, let's just go on raw, visceral emotion from my gut.
Mine's going to be gut, data, logic, and extreme wisdom. That's what I'm going to base mine on. Okay.
You say extreme wisdom, mate. I'm not
profound
convinced.
Ancestral wisdom
passed down around the campfire from generation to generation.
Imparted. It went through my council estate when growing up, James. This wisdom.
Then that's the only validation it needs, mate.
That's all it needs.
Yeah.
Let's start off. Number 1, James. Businesses do not solve problems. Do you want me to start this one off?
Well, I kind of know where this is going, because it's almost a figure of 8 argument, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So I know, but you started off, mate, because I've already
figure of 8 argument.
Sense of where it's going.
Is that infinity sign?
It's infinity.
Yeah. Okay, so the premise of this is, if you solve the problem, the root cause, first principles problem, your business would no longer need to exist. So it's not in your real interest to solve a problem with a business. Your interest is to manage a symptom of a problem, which is usually a systemic problem, to prolong your business for as much as possible. Yes, you can say businesses are an evolving entity, James. So you have to move with the times, you have to update your services, but then that becomes a different type of businesses. But then you could say, is that solving a new problem or not, James?
Well, I think the long-term strategy for any business is to be adaptable enough to solve problems that come along that you can't necessarily predict. But this is a beauty of software now, is that you can have the hardware, but the software can be updated to adapt. So you've got that level of adaptability. So you don't have a dinosauric situation where something happens, it can't adapt, it doesn't have the tools, or it doesn't have the forward planning, in which case it potentially will die. But if you've got the setup there that it can actually accommodate change, then it's much more likely it will survive and be a long-term proposition. So I guess it's got to be taken on a case-by-case basis, isn't it? So a blanket term, which is a little bit clickbaity, I have to say, mate, but this is
Never.
what it's all about, isn't it? Is that you've got to take into account what the nature of the business is, the people behind the business, the size of the business, because that's a factor as well, isn't it? If it's a large business, less likely that it can adapt quickly, potentially enough. But another thing a large business has going for it is potentially forward planning, that they've already started to have a succession planning type thing built in, that they can then go, well, let's see where this is going long term, and then make sure that we're putting resources. Maybe we have a department set aside to plan for the future that can then adapt. But certainly larger organizations are slower to change course than a more agile, smaller business that can adapt to the changing trends in markets.
I'm saying, James, though, did they even solve problems in the first place? Let's take this analogy. Let's take a slave. A slave, you need chains. So you need the ball and chain, the handcuffs. You chain the slaves together. Okay? We start off with that premise. That's like the economy. Think of that as the beginning of the economy. Then you need somebody who builds these chains, who creates these chains. That's a business. Yeah. Then for that business to work, you need somebody to mine the metals for the chains. Then you need somebody to create the vehicles that move the metals to the place where the chains are made. Then you need different types of chains. Okay. Then you need oil because the chains get rusty. Then you need different sizes. Then, then you've got basically an offshoot of businesses made because the first premise is you need chains, but you don't really need that. You don't really need the chains, but because you've got them and you've started the economy from not a first principles problem solving place, you've then got an offshoot of services that get so far away from actually solving problems that by the time you get 10 services down the line, you're not even sure what the problem is. And this is what I believe is our economy on steroids. People are going into corporations, and realistically, all you want is shelter, food, be able to move from A to B and have some community and connection. And then all of a sudden, you're in some place where you're sitting behind a desk for 10 hours to sell some type of insurance product, and you're paying interest on a mortgage for 50 years, and you're commuting, and you're just living this very abstract life to basically go back to the first principles problem of being able to have shelter and food. So you lose touch with reality on a very broad spectrum. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I mean, it's pretty existential, isn't it? And we're getting into the realms of psychology, of thinking about what we choose to believe is reality, what we need, what we fundamentally need, what we think we need, what we've been told we need. And again, this comes back to the conversations that we've had about, Bernays back in the 1920s that created this environment where we thought we needed all these things that we don't necessarily need, but it's done in such a way in which it becomes part of the vernacular or associated with success, thriving, whatever, because the seed has been sown subliminally, surreptitiously. And because we're all talking about it, that's suddenly how things should be, that they didn't exist before. But because somebody has recognized that, knows how we can be influenced en masse, that these things are then put out into the universe for us to disseminate, decide that is relevant and something that we want to move towards, because that's how we operate, isn't it? We want to move towards something that's attractive as opposed to painful. We want to move towards something that we think is going to improve our lives. And many businesses are built on that we're solving a problem that we didn't have necessarily to begin with. But it's symptomatic when you think of taking a drug, for example. It has that downstream effect of causing another problem that you then have to take another drug to solve that problem. So pharmaceutically, you're ending up taking 10 drugs when really all you needed was one, and perhaps you didn't even need that one. But because it's created this downstream effect that now you're having to take more and more and more to counter the effects of that one particular drug that you're taking. So all of that is evident in life generally, that we are solving problems but creating problems as a result. And this exponential, going back to that figure of 8, that we're going around in these cycles of getting to a point where we suddenly go, oh, hold on a minute. There's a pause here that we can then really look at our behaviors and say, I don't need to be doing that anymore. And invariably it comes with a stage of life as well. This is my experience. You get to a certain age and things don't matter like they used to.
No.
Your priorities change. And until they change, maybe that behavior will continue because you think or you don't even think, you're just subconsciously doing these behaviors that you haven't questioned before.
But generationally, when you're brought up in a system or a culture where, that it's normal, that's the way things are, you don't question it. You just don't know any different, do you? That's the thing. You grow up, you get a job, you get your mortgage, you do whatever, you go on holiday, you have your 4 weeks off a year if you're lucky, you retire, you die. That's the game. Whereas you think to yourself, imagine if you was between 12 and 16, instead of just doing traditional school, you was given a piece of land, allocated some land, you're taught how to build your own house. You could literally probably do it within a couple of years, and you just save yourself 50 years.
But I think we've never been in a time where there's so much information available that it can't be contained anymore. I think up until potentially the dawn of the internet, that information could be controlled to an extent. Going back to that analogy about the printing press and how information was circulated, that before the printing press, it would just be a select few of individuals that were able to, had the ability to write, that were taught to do it. It was a training over many years, and that was kind of regulated. Then you bring into life the printing press, and now obviously there's you have to have a printing press and you have to be trained how to use it. But as soon as you've done that, thousands and thousands and thousands of copies of one particular piece of writing can be duplicated and circulated en masse. So now the control is starting to wane because it's down to the individual who has access to that printing press. But now, present day, we've got social media, the internet, where anybody can publish anything they like. Now, there's still a level of regulation around that in terms of freedom of speech. But if I was to go now and start a blog, I could start a blog on anything. I can go and do a YouTube channel on anything, any subject, any particular genre. And I can put that out into the ether. Now, depending on whether people resonate with that, and if you do it regularly enough for people to then to start getting a relationship with the content you're putting out, as to whether people then start to take it into account and apply it. So there's never been a time where the information's out there, in which case the choice is unprecedented. The knowledge is unprecedented. So if people can now start to challenge the status quo, now is the time when it's being challenged at more than ever in history, because the knowledge is there, because people can see they're being exposed to all of this, that what their parents were telling them isn't 100% fact, and there's no other interpretation to that. They're being exposed to a myriad of different experiences, and now the choice is there as to whether they want to try that or they don't want to try that.
Yeah, but it's very rare to, like, you don't really see many people talking about anything, external to the context of the sort of capitalist game, do you? It's like you're in the game. It is what it is. We're in a market economy. This is the time of this part of civilization. And it's very rare that people will step outside of that thinking to think about what else could be a potential, or what am I doing this for? Especially if you're somebody who has played the game really well, you're probably less inclined to do that. Let's say you've bought up loads of property, or you're making money through entrepreneurship, or whatever you're doing. If you've done well, you're less inclined to think about it. If you haven't done well, you're so preoccupied by trying to cover your survival basis that you haven't even got time to think about it. So it's a weird sort of
two extremes.
Yeah, it's weird. It says on here, I put it into ChatGPT. It says the argument would be businesses are profit-driven entities, not social services. A 2023 McKinsey report found that 72% of corporate innovation initiatives are designed to increase short-term profits, not solve root problems. For example, the pharmaceutical industry often prioritizes chronic treatment over cures. The global market for diabetes medication was 58 billion in 2022, yet lifestyle change, not medication, is often the actual solution. So that's a good one. So it talks about fast fashion and climate change there. So when you've got a profit incentive, it can skew problem solving, can't it, James? If you've got quarterly targets to meet, or there's more money in managing symptoms than there is actually curing a disease. If you cured cancer and you've got a cancer drug that sort of manages the symptoms, and that cure is basically you just take this one thing, you're done. You're done for life. That's a business problem, isn't it?
And it's how cynical we are about that, about cancer treatment that's found, and the value and the price that's put on that, and the access to that drug. Because again, historically, it can be postcode situation, whether you get access to that, either free of charge or at a reduced rate, depending on where you live. And you think, well, how can that be? And economically, you know that, where people live can be a reflection, but it should all be potentially means tested. But then that's fraught with issues as well. So if there was something, so say, for example, cancer treatment was I mean, there's obviously lots of different cancers, so you can't just lump it under the C word and say that that would be a treatment for all. But if there could be one that would treat, let's say, 60, 70% of all known cancers, what would that look like? What would be the business case for that? How would that be monetized? Who would have access to it?
Like
So you've got
diabetes
the
is
moral.
very lucrative, isn't it? Like
Well, diabetes is now morphed into GLP-1s, that's come from that you've got. That is now a separate business in itself. It's an offshoot.
Yeah.
Because it's not just applicable to people with type 2 diabetes. Now you've got anybody. The market is infinite in respect of people that can get access to it, albeit it's still, as far as I know, has to be prescribed by a doctor.
But we know diabetes is the symptom.
Well, I've had conversations with people
Mostly.
that are actually going online, because you can access this online, and lying about how much they weigh to get access to it, because there's stipulations in terms of how much you have to weigh. They'll take it on your BMI, your body mass index, and people that I've spoken to that are fudging it, or sending because you've got to send a photograph in to prove.
Yeah,
and it's well, AI, you can do anything with that, can't you?
But we know systemically the problem is to do with mass marketing of extremely poor food. People are over consuming in terms of calories, but they're malnourished. They're working long hours for a little amount of money. A lot of obesity is based in places where there's a lot of poverty. So there's an educational problem. There's a systemic financial issue, and who's going to pay 3-4 quid for a piece of broccoli when you can buy 2 pizzas in Iceland for £1?
Well, you think about historically how society has flipped. Obesity was the preserve of the rich.
The rich, yeah,
because they had access to that level of food, and the servants to bring it to them, and they had the fat of the land. And then the working class were the working class, that they would be out tending the fields and doing the farming and having that physical labor. And now it's gone the other way, that the rich classes have access to good healthcare, personal trainers, personal chefs.
Yeah,
the best sort of food still, but educationally, it's a generalization. It's not always the case.
But the medicine's good, and the advances in tech is good, but in general, people's health is obviously sanitation, childbirth, cleanliness, all of that type of stuff, brilliant. Antibiotics, those type of things, great. But in terms of lifestyle diseases, lifestyle causes of cancer's up in the under 50s. Cancer's 1 in 2 now. Diabetes level, chronic obesity, depression, anxiety. It's not great, is it? In terms of the amount of services, products, options, information, you could say all of that is skyrocketed. But in actual, people's health, normally everybody's got a grandparents that are, have a lot of long-term relationships, marriages, and live to be quite old in a certain generation, in the last 100 years anyway. But this generation, with obesity in children and the quality of food, then I would say this is just a symptom of our systemic root cause, profit-driven incentives that people, you've got McDonald's sponsoring the Olympics. You got big investors who are right behind things like Coca-Cola. We know this is like 13 spoons of sugar in just one can, and you're just advertising that to children. What do you expect's going to happen? It's not rocket science, is it, James?
No. And again, the power these businesses have is immense, and they will influence public sentiment.
Yeah.
And they can get into the halls of power that the, let's say, healthier options can't get into because they don't have that buying power.
Yeah.
And that's, therein lies the irony. That
in hospitals in the US, I know doctors there, they have McDonald's inside of the hospital.
I was
They
just
have
about to say,
people
the
with
cost of
having
the
cancer
NHS.
treatment and going down to have a McDonald's.
Yeah.
You're just like,
It's just this spiral, isn't it? Of like, we know what the solution is, but we can't bring ourselves to actually implement it because of market factors.
or does it just the money talks, and the short-term money
it
incentives
influences.
is
Of course it
driven.
influences.
So we had it the other day where we've had two examples in the health tech space. We've got big box gyms. They make they because they're working on volume in terms of memberships. You don't want people to go.
You don't want wear and tear on your kit.
That's the honest
You don't
truth.
want wear and tear on
You can't have 3,000, 5,000 people turn up on a
doesn't work.
Thursday afternoon. You haven't got the capacity. You really want people to pay their membership but not really go. Ideally.
Yeah.
So
it's fascinating then when they're putting incentives to really focus on the customer journey. Because you think, well, that's shooting themselves in the foot in that respect. What you've just said, why would you want people to come in, have a great experience, and then want to stay? You want a percentage of them to come in, have a great experience. The ones that, and they'll know the algorithm. You've worked in gyms, I've worked in gyms. It's always the same faces. You've got a core amount of people that will not give that gym up, even in a financial crisis. They will not give up their gym membership. They will do whatever it takes to be able to keep that going. And there's others that will go, not really fussed. I'll go next month. But they know that that's human nature. They know there's a percentage of the population that will go week in, week out. They'll go 3, 4, 5 days, even 7 days a week, some people, because it's become very much attached to who they are as an individual. And they'll go in and invariably do the same exercises. I've experienced it. The same people on the same kit. They'll just head down. They'll go for it. But what they don't want, and what they're putting a lot of emphasis on, is the people that are harder to engage, that it takes a bit of work for them to stay, that they have to feel valued. They've got to feel like they're on a journey. And the whole setup is there to assist them on their journey, that it's like step one, this is where you're at right now. Okay, so we've got to meet you where you are. And that would be different. It'd be different for you, it'd be different for me. So where are you at step one? Then step two, okay, so how do we nudge you to the next level?
But mathematically, James, it's logistically impossible. You don't want that. It's
logistically impossible, but they have to be seen to be, because again, there's not enough of that sort of, let's say 1% of the people that will go, if somebody says hello to them or they don't say hello to them, they're not really focused on that. They want to get in. The kit has to be good. It's got to have everything they want, and the parking's got to be good. As long as you get that right, for those individuals, they'll go. If they can get on the kit that they want, it's not too busy, and they can get their workout done and then leave, they're good with that. Then you've got the rest of the population who they're trying to attract. And there's grades of this, that people that will go, and then people who just will not go. They will not go to a gym. They don't associate themselves with somebody that goes to a gym. Yeah. So there's obviously grades of people that go. But the model is
what we're saying, what we're saying from a business model, we're not just picking on gyms. It could be in multiple areas, multiple businesses, but the fundamental premise is the opposite of improving the thousands of people's health, because you can't logistically have them all turn up. Can't do it. It's not going to work. So
No.
again, that's one. But in terms of, we'll leave that there for people to discuss. I would be, if people put in the comments if they've got businesses that they think solve problems, and then even try yourself to look for first principles on what problem actually needs solving. So you might say something like, Elon Musk is doing electric cars. You might think Tesla's a solution to a problem, but then you might say, well, is it though? The problem is people are needing to get from A to B. Why are they needing to get from A to B? Because they need to pay for a mortgage or rent. Okay, why do they need to pay for mortgage or rent? It's because we've got this type of system. So that means they're sitting in traffic for 2 hours. So you don't need the car. It doesn't matter if it's electric or runs on water. The first principles problem solving is where is that person going and why, not how they get in there.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we have been personal trainers, and at the end of the day, I've had clients for 16, 17 years that have stayed with me. Now, you could argue it's like, well, why is that the case? Because if you've taken them on a journey, or if you've trained them for so long, that should then become habitual for them, that they want that. So why did we exist after a period of time? It should be that you start them off and then off they go. They can do it themselves. Very rarely the case. Maybe they drop off. Maybe it's a financial reason. Maybe they move away, whatever. Maybe there's something else that happens. But, we need that level of accountability. So there is longevity in that, because that's around relationships, and almost the kind of training's a byproduct of that. If somebody can stand to be with you for an hour, maybe 3 times a week, you get to know that person quite well. You get like a relationship. We've been talking about it. It becomes, the lines do sometimes get a little bit blurred with some individuals, that you then form quite a strong bond with that individual.
Yeah. But they was eating well, and they was going on, community walks, or they was doing more gardening. And for that personal trainer, if you give that personal trainer infinite access to, everything they want in the universe, everything they could do in their potential, trust me, no one's going to choose to count to 10 on reps. People won't be doing it.
Yeah.
They're doing it because they've got external things that they need to pay for. It's just another symptom. It's another chain.
And we get into a pattern of thinking around it, that's what's expected, for us to just stand there and count to 10 and say, right, and be very formulaic about it. And this particular type of exercise, because that's what we've been taught to do, is the right thing to do. And this kind of starts to segue, isn't it, into that element about modern exercise is not relevant.
Yeah.
But because it's so choreographed in a particular way, that we then become performative monkeys to regurgitate what we were taught, because that's what we were taught, that is now relevant to do. And you will have had times, and I've certainly had times of thinking, well, why am I doing this? There's no functional value to this particular thing that I'm doing. But there's this level of expectation of what the client thinks this thing looks like, and what you were taught as being relevant to do with a client.
Yeah, that leads us in. We'll skip past actually we'll quickly do the second one, which is we'll do this one quickly, that most nations will be bankrupt. Okay. The theme is, at the moment, in terms of the statistics on this one, so all nations will be bankrupt. Inflation and debt are unstoppable. So as of 2024, global public debt is 97 trillion, up from 37 trillion in 2007. So debt is growing. Pretty much all nations are, indebted to each other. Every dollar that comes into existence is attached to debt. You know, when you've got mortgage debt, you've got from the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England. So, you know, the US national debt exceeds 34 trillion, with interest payments alone projected to surpass defense spending by 2026. You know, inflation is going up every single year. What does that mean? It really means that if the trajectory just goes in the same direction as it's going now, you're going to buy a chocolate bar for £1 million. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I mean, inflation and interest rates, they fluctuate, don't they? I think it was back 1979, I think it was. What were they at, like 16, 17%?
Well, it's going up every year, isn't it?
Well, at the moment, what interest rates are 4.25, I think, at the moment. They've come down, I think, from 4.5. And I think
I'm saying you buy a pint of milk in the 1960s and you buy a pint of milk now. The price is completely different. So if you just follow that logic and you go down another 5,000-10,000 years, then we're just going to be inevitably in a place where it's going to be stupid. It's going to be silly. And at the moment, we're just head in the sand, trying to get by year to year with the same mentality. It makes no sense. You can't just keep going into national debt, borrowing, more debt, more interest, and inflation just keeps going up. If wages still stagnate and house prices continue like they have done in the last 70 years, then the average house is going to be £10 million, and your average wage is going to be like 50 grand. So it doesn't make any sense that it can keep going.
And I think another element to add into that thing that fascinates me is efficiency. Is that all the time we're looking for more and more ways to be more efficient. And in that efficiency, in terms of like supply chain, for example, you become more efficient with it, that cost is taken out from the bottom line because you've improved efficiency. Well, that's got to come from somewhere, isn't it? Somebody else is missing out because they're now redundant in that supply chain. So in order for businesses to survive, certainly in the supply industry, say the food industry, for example, or automotive, whatever, automotive industry, some of them have got, I think Rivian, for example, the electric car company, I think they've got maybe 6 levels of supplier for certain elements of it's a hugely complicated supply chain, but all the time they're looking to refine that to get that better and better and better to survive, because competition's quite fierce. And what they're trying to do is encourage more and more electric vehicle companies to come into existence so that, competition is good. At the moment, I don't know what percentage of the car industry is still petrol or diesel, combustion engine. Maybe it's 60% to 40% electric. I don't know what it is. But to move to 100%, you're obviously going to need a lot more electric vehicle car companies to make that sustainable.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the supply chain is getting refined more and more and more, in which case there aren't so many moving parts, or, the complication gets reduced. So that has a consequence as well. So people are being taken out of the market, and then where do they go? What areas do they move into? But going back to your point in terms of inflation, it will get to crazy money. I mean, when you look at economies like Germany pre-World War II, they were burning money in the streets for fuel.
Or Zimbabwe, which is like millions of...
The Deutschmark was worthless.
Yeah, millions to buy the most piece of bread. It was like £1 million. But that is the trajectory. We can bury our head in the sand and we can do whatever. But if you just look at the data and statistical analysis over the last 100 years, then we know wage stagnation, house asset prices, and national debt is on a trajectory that it just doesn't, it's just not going to, unless something changes fundamentally, systemically, then
Yeah.
we're on
I
that
mean,
path.
well, you
So
can see car ownership and house ownership probably going in the same way, that people just will not want to own a car. It won't make sense to own a car.
no, you can
And
see
a house.
companies like Zipcar in London, which is brilliant, where you can just have an app. You know, you don't own a car, you use it when you need it. Because no, most people that have got a car, 99% of the time, it's parked up. They're not using it. It's not
Yeah.
efficient. Traffic is not efficient at all. Having to maintain your own car, which is a depreciating liability. You know, as soon as you drive it out the forecourt, it's lost money.
Well, it
Every year it's
depreciates
costing you. Yeah.
50%. But can
It's
you
a waste
imagine,
of
like,
money.
modular homes? We'll go back to kind of nomadic lifestyles where we don't need to be located in one place. Either you just rent on a sort of an Airbnb style. Talking to
100%.
my youngest son, it's like £8 a night for an Airbnb in Bali, for example.
Yeah.
Why would you not go, and if you're in the gig economy, or you can be an internet nomad, why would you not go and spend 6 months in Bali paying £6 a night?
100% agree. I don't think house ownership or wanting to have that is going to be the future of humanity. I think it
And that
will
will
be.
change. My children won't advise their children like I was advised, or you were
Yeah.
advised, or I advised actually, I haven't advised my kids to get a mortgage. Because it's not seemingly possible for them unless I can earn sufficient money to get them a decent deposit. So the narrative has changed, and it's been taken out of our hands because of those economic factors.
Yeah.
Whereas when you were growing up, when I was growing up, when my parents were growing up, they were told that they had to own their own house, or that was the natural progression, is to have a mortgage, own your own house, the family unit, all that sort of thing. Those days are over.
Oh, it's 100%. And look when that inflation goes, James, and you reach a certain point. You know, if you look at your mortgage already over the lifetime of the mortgage, you're paying like 3 to 4 times the actual value of your house back in interest, which is just ridiculous. And then as soon as it reaches a point, it could be 100 years, 200 years, as soon as it goes over a certain threshold, you're going to be paying 40% inheritance tax unless they change that. So then you're going to lose the thing anyway. So it's happening to people now, especially in London. They don't realize they're sitting on assets over a certain threshold that they're going to end up having to sell the house to pay the inheritance tax down. So, this is everyone's burying their heads in the sand with it. It's a systemic problem which coerces people into doing, jobs that don't really need to be doing, and people into careers that don't really need to exist. I think it's crumbling the fabric of our society. It's destroying family units. People can't afford to have kids. They're not even thinking about kids. They're thinking about their careers being this thing that gives them meaning. But in reality, you ask them what they actually do. First principles problem solving. It's probably quite meaningless and hard. People don't understand why they don't feel connected, why they don't feel good, why they feel depressed, why their career's not making them happy. I think it's quite logical, to be honest, of why they don't. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one, James. Modern exercise is bad for our health. You alluded to this. We're both personal trainers. I would say, from what I learned as a personal trainer about doing reps, sets, weight training, if you look at it logically, weight training in a fixed plane of movement, I know they say work in different planes of movement. For anybody who's not into exercise, it's just the direction in which you pull or push something. But say you're sitting on a machine pushing something from A to B repetitively. No ancestor would do that logically, or be trying to hit their 1 rep max, or be going for progressive overload. Do you think your ancestor would be picking up a boulder and thinking, I'm going to do this 10 times for no reason. And then next time I'm going to pick up a little bit something heavier and do that again. And then build up this threshold. So for me, I was doing a lot of weight training in my younger days, ended up, herniating my own discs in my back in my late 20s. That's crazy. I know so many personal trainers, so many clients, whether they're marathon runners, weight trainers, who have got chronic pain injuries caused by exercise. I don't know if you've had the same, James.
Yeah, and I always thought I had this thing that because I wasn't doing the same sort of stuff that other trainers were doing, that I wasn't a proper trainer in the early days. I kind of had that little bit of a sense like, oh, well, everybody else is doing that. And the narrative was around, lifting heavy. And there's definitely a case to be made for that in terms of, bone density and muscle density,
osteoporosis and stuff.
Yeah.
But again,
so that you can't ignore, but there has to be balance in all things. There has to be balance. And something I came across fairly early days was this term called most stability. So you've got to have stability to begin with, to then be able to build something on top of it. If you were trying to lift heavy on an injury, or you didn't have the capability, that was injury territory. But what I really thrived on, and what I focused on, was actually if you bend over to pick up a pencil, that your lumbar spine isn't going to pop.
Yeah.
Or that if you were to turn around and grab something from behind you, that wasn't going to be a problem for you. So really focusing on movements in all dimensions. So all of the planes. So you've got your sagittal, frontal, transverse, so rotational type stuff. Because that's how we do move. And it was breaking down kind of movement patterns. But then you can stay, well, actually, playing any kind of sport, is that natural? Swinging a golf club, repetitions over and over and over and over again.
Just not sitting in a chair for 10 hours a day. Something as simple as that. Being able to sit in a squat position from your early teens.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to the toilet, for example, we never had toilets to sit on. You had to squat.
Yeah.
Giving birth, squat. When you think about gravity naturally being there to facilitate
walking,
it's like women were not lying on their backs giving birth.
Yeah.
They were in a squat position. But
because people think they go to the gym for an hour, they could be good. If you sit down all day and then you go and, rattle yourself in a gym for an hour, man, you could be causing yourself some damage because your body's so tight from sitting in those positions for such a long time, and your posture's changing, the way, your bones are breaking down, redeveloping, your ligaments are doing the same muscles. Then you go and push yourself in a gym. Go and look at all the big players out there, in terms of the fitness space. And then you go and look into their stories, and you're looking at, shoulder operations, knee pain, chronic back pain. If you go and look at Goggins, this guy is like a walk-in injury. He's all over the place. Go and look at a bodybuilder in their 60s. Show me a bodybuilder that's been in bodybuilding for 30 years, and I'll show you somebody.
The thing is that they will be categorized as outliers. That there's the bodybuilding industry. You've got a small percentage of people that are in that who actually succeed, and yes, that's extreme. And the endurance field is bigger. There's a lot more people doing it. And again, if you're talking about sort of 50 miles plus is termed to be endurance, or an ultra marathon, for example, over 50 miles. And, it comes down to very much the individual, that we're not sort of throwing all of this under the bus in terms of exercise per se. But if it's particularly formulaic and very prescribed and a particular type, then it's potentially fraught with issues. But we have to then qualify it by saying it's down to the individual, that if you're going to go hell for leather, if you're moving towards joy of movement, for example, that's something different to running away from the demons. You know, the injury comes when you don't care. You want to try to sort of silence what's going on in your head. And that may take the form of, going too heavy, just, beasting yourself.
Running long distances. So Louis says, interesting conversation regarding exercise. Taking me years to find the right person who I don't end up injured with. Wise words, gentlemen. Louise, you're completely right. And on the personal training side, you got a couple of problems there. When you're a personal trainer, you're incentivized because of money to try and get this person to lose weight as quickly as possible. So you just think, right, we need to get them burning calories, which could mean more exercise, it usually ends up being higher impact exercise.
Yeah.
But what happens is you take a deconditioned person and you start giving them a lot of exercise, you're just going to cause a lot of trouble, especially women as well, specifically that you have who wear potentially high heel shoes and they've been doing that for a long time. Well, all of a sudden their calves are like permanently contractive, their Achilles are super tight, they end up going for a run and biomechanically they're all over the place. Their calves can't take any impacts, they're going to get hip injuries, knee injuries, and then they can't train anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I always had an awareness around the sort of needs and the wants, is that what the client knows what they want, and you as a trainer should know what they need. And it's then how to marry the two up. So it's managing expectations, because they'll come and they'll say, look, I want to lose weight, invariably, tone up. I want to feel fitter. So all of these terms are things that we just kind of throw around, but it's then sort of drilling into it. Well, what does that actually look like? What is it that they want to achieve? How will they be able to track progress? So, for example, getting up in the morning and not feeling like they haven't slept, or that they're aching and they just want to feel like they can take on the day without being in pain. But it's almost a sort of a personal pressure to say it has to look a certain way or it's not relevant. It has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but it's the conversation that only comes over time, I think, in the trust between a client and a trainer to say, look, I know this is what you want and I understand it, I get it, because they're seeing what's out in the social media and what their friends have been doing, and whether that be a paleo diet, whether that be sort of, carnivore, vegan, whatever other diet that they're, wanting to follow. But let's just stop a second and see what actually it is that you want, because what they're saying to you might be what other people have said, and they're not really sure that that's what they want. So what's relevant to them as an individual?
And as a trainer, you've got to have that experience, James, haven't you, to say, look, I understand what you want. You want to do something quick, but a lot of trainers, people can tolerate certain exercises in the short term. That you might get away with it for 12 weeks. You might give them some, lunges, squats, or whatever they're doing. Their body might tolerate it, but it might be a situation where the straw's going to break the camel's back. You're literally playing with fire, and you're building them up for 6 months, a year down the line, where their body's going to be so out of sync that they're going to snap, basically.
Yeah, and it is tricky because people want results quick. We know that. We know that they want quick results. It's that simple.
So perhaps all trainers also need to understand proprioception, interoception, and vestibular balance from the neuroscience. So yeah, there's a lot to it with the proprioception side, and just in terms of knowing the person's background. You're not going to reverse 20 years of inactivity
No.
in 12 weeks.
I mean, I've got clients in
take
their
you a
80s, and
while.
a lot of stuff that we focus on is, you know, A, preventing a fall so they can stop themselves from falling,
Yeah.
and B, if they do fall, that they're going to have a better outcome.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, it's preventing the fall so that they can actually stop themselves. If they do trip, something kicks in, and that's very much about the environment that you're working in. So it's a contrived way, but it's a controlled way that if it does happen, the eventuality it does happen, that they can actually stop themselves, because it's these milliseconds in terms of reaction of something firing in the right order that will prevent them from going over. And if they do go over, the impact that then has of having the structure there. So it's all very much down to the individual, and that wouldn't be relevant to somebody in their 40s or 30s.
No,
necessarily.
no.
You
The,
can still
the road
integrate
to
it.
hell could be paved with good intentions, even with
Yeah.
things like the couch to 5K. You know, if you got somebody who's like 5 stone, 30 kilos overweight, and then you get them all of a sudden thinking that they're going to start building up running could be the worst thing that they could possibly do.
Mm.
They might be able to do it and tolerate it for a few months, but I'm thinking a year down the line, you got an Achilles injury or something goes wrong, and then all of a sudden your eating patterns go out. You normally see people who put on twice as much weight. If you get injured, then the trajectory of your weight loss is going to be terrible.
It's devastating.
It's terrible, isn't it? So I would say modern exercise rep sets is completely outdated. I think it needs, it could be done with AI, and you need to really take into account.
Well, how many people do you know that you've trained, and I still see people now, because they've been given 12 reps, that they will stop at 12? And
they will stop at 12, even if sometimes there's no need to even be doing it, to be honest. If you watch football players, James, after their careers, their knees are buggered. Or if you look at football players in the lower divisions, they're very top heavy, very muscular at the top. You look at the very best professionals, very small arms, no chest. Their training regime is just completely different.
Mm.
They're not working the same muscle groups. They think differently about how their body is maneuvering. And for your average Joe that sits down all day, that is probably the problem.
Yeah.
And then goes and does, a massive spin class. The amount of people I see who have got like lateral knee pain, hip pain, Achilles problems, sciatica, back pain is chronic, neck pain, nerd neck, frozen shoulder. It's chronic, and people who look very fit, go and ask them about their injuries, and it doesn't matter what you look like. If you're in chronic pain,
it impacts everything.
Yeah, personal trainers. The amount of personal trainers I know in chronic pain, crazy. Modern exercise, that's the one for that one. Last one, James.
Tick.
Last controversial take is gender. Genders will merge into one. So there seems to be a bit of a gender war at the moment, which is quite interesting and political, doesn't it? The whole masculine thing with the Andrew Tates and the misogyny, and then the female empowerment, liberation. Should they want to have their say? It's like one extreme to another, isn't it? Of women have been suppressed, and now it's like women on OnlyFans, and then you've got the extreme of men being at the head of society, and then you got the Andrew Tates who are just taking it to the nth degree. But in general, James, men's testosterone is going down statistically, decade by decade, whether that's the inactivity, the exercise, the food,
estrogen in water.
Women are seeming to become more masculine, holding more masculine traits. doing more masculine jobs, becoming more economically viable, even in size wise. The men are shrinking, the women are becoming bigger. Are we merging into one, James?
Well,
Is
again,
this
it's
the future?
evolutionary. I think, again, it's division of labor. That because the gap has been narrowed in terms of what requires physical intervention, like when you're talking about farming, hunter-gatherer tribes, that division of labor was a thing, and now it's not so important anymore. So you don't have that distinct delineation, I suppose, between the sexes because of the division of labor. And I mean, I never forget, I went for a run a couple of weeks ago, and there was a family group out, or a friend group out, I should say. And the two women were walking in front. There was a couple of kids on bikes in between, and the two dads at the back, both with babies strapped to their chests. Now, probably 10 years ago, you would never have seen that.
No.
Possibly 15 years ago, whatever. But it's just an indication as to how things have changed, even since I was a father. All my children are grown up now. But I just had that awareness, whether it was an indication or a commentary on society, that fathers are becoming much, much more involved if they are around. And that's a different statistic in terms of divorce and how many relationships are breaking up with, single mother families, etc. But the fathers, if they are actually present, seem to be more involved or engaged.
Yeah,
and that's
it's not single mothers are taking on masculine and feminine roles, aren't they? At that time, so that's sort of merging into one. You got like we said, lack of testosterone, feminizing of men. Maybe they're becoming less violent. They don't have to, like you said, they don't have to be the protectors anymore. You could have a guy who's very small, skinny, non-violent, great at using a computer and the internet to create, economic viability. And that could be the best protector for a woman, more than a muscular guy who goes to the gym who earns no money.
In which case, natural selection has changed.
In terms of protection,
the physicality of it, based on attractiveness, was whether you could protect against predation. If you could provide and protect. And now that comes down much, much more to economics.
Yeah. Well, you see it now, though, don't you, James? It doesn't matter what the man looks like. If he's got money, then it doesn't matter what the personality of the woman is, but
I mean, again, it's a generalization, but it seems to be less important.
Yeah, and we're talking about trajectories, so it's going to be. It seems less important to have that physical presence, that ability to be able to fight. I get it. Some people are going to argue it's still important now. Women still want it. Yeah, but we're talking about
that. Then we were talking a couple of podcasts ago about Tinder and Bumble and dating apps, that very much, if you are taller, that you're going to do better.
Yeah.
And there's criteria seemingly being set. And again, all of this we'd have to check the statistics on it, but
this is 100%, James.
Well, women that are stipulating that they want over 6 foot, otherwise they're not interested.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
these things are not going to change overnight. I'm saying this, don't think of it now in the last 50 years or 100 years. I'm saying, like with inflation, where is it heading? Because what we're going to have is like Elon Musk said, we're going to have tons of robots out there. So these robots are going to be humanized. These robots are going to be gender neutral, all of them. So what happens when you can build a baby in a lab? What happens when it's easier for the guy to have virtual sex with a robot than he doesn't need the hassle of a relationship, and the woman vice versa, she can have babies by herself, no reliance on any other person. What
So do
happens
we
to
then
both of
become
the sexes?
asexual? Is this an evolutionary thing
Yeah.
that we're now becoming asexual?
But can you see it going? I personally, I've got a visceral feeling that I like, in my primitive potential brain to have traditional roles. I like the idea of, a man holding space as a man, having masculine energy, the feminine energy. In my mind, my logical mind, in my primitive state now, I value that and I can see the benefits of it. If I think outside of that and I think long term in terms of what's the trajectory and the potential, then I'm thinking, with human behavior, I can't see it not merging into one, James. I can just see how it's going to diverge into this test tube baby type of online virtual world of sex robots. And all of a sudden, what's going to happen? I don't know if you've heard of it. What's the space between your sort of your balls and your bum?
Perineum.
Perineum. So that's shortening, apparently. There's studies out there that are saying this is shortening in babies, which is basically a sign of, lower testosterone and a change in us humans. Have you read that, James? Have you heard anything about it?
No.
Yeah, apparently this is something that's happening with, they're saying it could be microplastics, it could be all sorts of stuff that's happening to us, the lower testosterone, the changes in environment, probably just the changes in dynamics, even what's happening to your brain if you ejaculate and you're not in a relationship and you're doing it in an online vicinity, then it's changing your brain chemistry. So then it's going to change you physically, hormonally.
Yeah.
And then if you fast track this 1,000 years, what's going to happen is the genders going to kind of morph together when that need for both genders is not needed.
What is fascinating, because obviously then you come into sexual desire, and that is absolutely on the evolution of species, isn't it? It's the next generation, and to procreate. And if that's taken out of the equation, what happens to sexual desire? Now, this isn't going to happen immediately, but over a period of time, does that then now cease to exist? Because if the proliferation of the species isn't predicated on two genders of that species getting together, then the desire is no longer required.
But you can see it, James, can't you? If you logically think about it, if I said to you, James, you can go out there, try and find this partner that's a match, 1 in 8 billion, and do this and do that, go through all the trials and tribulations, the challenges, or you can have a kid, you make it in a test tube, and it's the height you want, it's the this you want, it's the brains you want, and you get all of the other, intimacy and interaction from somewhere else. I know people will freak out and think this is not the same as human interaction, and there's a spiritual side and there's an energetic connection. I understand that, but I'm just saying, what's the trajectory? Because I don't know what the stats are, but I don't know if there's more openly bisexual people now, more openly gay people now. if you watch the Eurovision on the weekend, even I looked at it and I thought, this is basically a gay parade.
But what you're going to have, this is really interesting. It's like, well, why do we have children in the first place? Where does that desire come from?
That replication, yeah.
Well, and it's the closest thing you'll get to immortality is one thing. There's an innate desire for certain people. I'm not saying everybody has that, because some people just don't want children, and that's another thing. But it's part of the human makeup to want to, at some point in your life, procreate. Now, is this going to be a situation where you're just having children to look after you in your old age? Is it an insurance policy that you have somebody that is attached to you sufficiently, but there has to be an emotional bond that is going to be there to look after you when you're older? Okay, so that's one element to it. Now, if we have robotic carers, that's not going to be relevant.
It's not going to be relevant. No.
If you've got provision that if you become physically incapable of looking after yourself, then an entity steps in to do that for you. So that doesn't have to be a child. So this whole thing starts to kind of unravel a bit, doesn't it? In terms of the desire, what that looks like. Now, to boil it down to an insurance policy is one thing, and I'm not saying that's what it is. It certainly doesn't appear to be that right now. That if that becomes the case, that it's just a function as opposed to a desire and an emotional attachment and a biological necessity. There's this undeniable urge to have children. This you cannot ignore it. It's there just every day, this thing going on. If that ceases to exist, there has to be a level of intervention that says if we go down that route, then the human species will cease to exist.
But if you look at like exactly what you just said, James, what's the trajectory? Western people are having less kids, aren't they? People, majority, 99.9% of the time, are not having sex to have kids.
Yeah.
Procreation is not on their mind when they're thinking about sex. The vast majority of the time. So basically, they're trying to create a feeling.
But then throw into the mix contraception. Is that prior to contraception, it was an inevitable outcome. You didn't have the choice. Yeah. So, you were going to get pregnant. So the whole thing about the desire to have sex was the outcome
of this. Yeah.
The whole thing, from start to finish, was geared towards the proliferation of the species.
And what if you don't need human interaction with the economy anymore? Let's say you're displacing jobs, James, and humans no longer need to be a central part of labor, which is it's an inevitability. You're not going to need humans to partake in the labor for no reason. Humans will be there just like you have maybe your dog, or they called it like humans will be like your house cat. It's got there's no function for that cat, but you don't want to kill it because it's living an experience of life. And I think maybe we will be the house cats of the world. We won't have like a real utilization. People even think, if you throw in things like legacy, James, and people say, oh no, I want to, pass my legacy on. And you ask them what their great granddad's name is, and they haven't got a clue. And it's so diluted anyway from, marriages and connection with other families that it doesn't take 1 or 2 generations and you have no idea who your
Well, we haven't talked to our children the way that I was talked to by my parents. It's not the sitting around and the storytelling about your grandparents. I've hardly said anything to them in terms of storytelling like that. And I don't know whether it'll be the same for them. It comes down to the relationship, I think, you have with your parents potentially. But it's for how long that will go on for that you then start to have those stories passed down. And yeah, it's that kind of relevance, isn't it? But seemingly it comes down to sentience, that if you've now got the ability to have a robot that can think for itself, a program that can start to think for itself, the relevance of the human being becomes obsolete. That all the time we have independent thought, control, that we can do the programming and are ultimately at the top of the hierarchy, then we're relevant. But as soon as something comes along that doesn't suffer from disease, dementia, physical ailments that we do that can, will die fundamentally, that will continue to exist.
Or you can have a baby from the lab and you say to the lady, look, you don't need to go through all of
Not
this
even a baby. It's
9
just
months of pain. You don't
building another
need...
robot. It's building another sentient robot.
But say you just, even if you want us to be like the modern day house cats, humans are that. Even if you want a baby and you want to design a baby, can you see the trajectory where, why put the woman in danger to go through natural childbirth and the changes to the body and stuff like that? If you could replicate it, make it safer, make it better. I'm not saying that's going to be anytime soon, but it's moving in that direction. And then, you, like we've said, you sort of merge.
Well, I mean, the whole question
together.
is at what point are the brakes put on? That if they can see it moving in that direction, that actually we're now creating this catalyst, this domino effect that you can't then stop. You get past that point of no return, that you can't switch it off anymore. So at each point, it's a bit like building a tunnel that you've got to shore up the sides, otherwise the whole thing collapses. That at certain waypoints, they've got to stop and question the morality of this. And I know that AI, there's lots of debate around that at some points they've got to go, well, is there a fail-safe here? Is there a switch that we can push just in case? Is that being built into the system that actually we don't reach this exponential, that we then lose control because the AI, the algorithm then takes over and takes us out of the equation and overrides? So are we putting in fail-safes at waypoints along the way so that can never happen?
Going by what the top guys are saying, James, that it is inevitable that this thing's a runaway train. This is the top guys at Google, at the other places. They know once this thing becomes, ultra smart with its generative AI or super intelligence, then, it's just what time horizon you look at it over. I just can't see any other trajectory. Whether if we're like house cats and we can just experience, our lives in a bit of a experiential cocoon, that we'll go back to our default primitive ways and we'll want to have these type of relationships and we'll still have our sexual urges, but the inevitability that we're going to be cyborgs, aren't we? That's 100%. We're going to be so connected to the virtual internet space, whether that's, DNA, chips in the brain, some type of quantum type of connection with our environment, that we are not going to be, we're not going to be humans. Brain atrophy. Yeah, like our appendix type of thing, or our towel in our coccyx sort of shriveled up. What parts of the brain is going to die off when we don't need real memory anymore, do we? We're not going to need that.
No.
I know
and
people
they're
get
learning
really
from their
sad
potential.
about this and they get very sentimental about it, but I just see it as, I keep saying the word trajectory, but it is like that, isn't it?
Well, then you've got climate change as well to take into. It's like at some point, then people are going to give up on climate change, because if the human species continues, there might be a Mars, it might not be, maybe another planet that's more suitable. But it's like Earth, if it does become unsuitable for
Yeah,
humans or
sort of
sustaining human life,
inhospitable. Yeah.
it's like, well, if machines are prevalent, then it doesn't matter, does it? Because they won't
No.
need to breathe air.
And we know from science, I don't know if we know 110%, but we know that, the sun's going to blow up and the whole earth's going to blow up at some point on a long enough time horizon. So, the whole meaning of life is for us to sort of understand our environment, be able to get off this planet, become sort of like an interstellar species. That
Mm.
is our advanced civilization trajectory. But whether it's like you see aliens, like I said before, they've dissolved their ego, they all look the same. Is that because they're so evolved that they're evolved to the point that even sex doesn't exist?
Yeah. But
And
it's another interesting thing is how much money has been pumped into longevity and the cure for aging. So you think if we're trying to achieve immortality, what that looks like. So all of this money that's been pumped into curing aging, and aging being looked at as a disease, if over a period of time we're able to head stuff off at the pass, the aging, if we can start to reprogram these downstream effects of aging with things like these single-celled organisms and sirtuins and bowhead whales that live till sort of 200 years old, and Greenland sharks sort of 3, 4, 500 years, and they take all of those learnings, and then we're starting to live 300-500 years. What that looks like.
you'd need a bit more space, wouldn't you, if
You need a bit more
we
space,
were
but
if we were
if
replicating? But there is
well,
infinite space, isn't there? That's the thing.
there is, but if we're not producing, if we're not having offspring, and maybe sexual maturity starts to sort of extend, that we're not becoming sexually mature until 30s, 40s, because we're now living in 500. All of these things are factors that, if this is the trajectory we're hell bent on going for, if we want to cure aging because it's being perceived as a disease, what are the downstream effects of that we're living longer? Has that been modeled in respect of what's that going to do to the populations? And now factor in AI and robots.
That will be an absolute mind bender, won't it? To be honest, I think all we know now is that we're living in a very primitive way. Technology has exploded over the last
Yeah,
100, 200 years to a
never
point
never
where
been like it is now.
our primitive psychology is just no way going to catch up with this rate of change of this technology. And things that people hold dear, like gender, like certain traditional dynamics, even the premise of work and work being part of your identity, all things that are just going to have to evolve, and these are going to be very hard things to let go. And when I say evolve, I don't mean in the next 12 weeks. I think of things in terms of potentially centuries, and this is just a direction in which we're going in. Maybe with exponential growth, things are changing probably a lot quicker than people anticipated, but this is where I see it. I can't see it going any other way, James?
Well, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, when you have a sensibility around what you're certain of. So, like, at one point, we were certain about what a man was and the definition of what a man was in terms of sexuality, biology, etc. And you were sure about what a woman was. And that definition was pretty well defined. And you could categorize somebody because of their physical makeup, their biology of what they were categorized as. Yes, you had androgynous, but you had pretty much two distinct genders. And that's now been thrown out the window because it doesn't matter what biologically you're defined as. Now, it can only be a definition or a word. What you choose to call yourself is entirely up to you. But how do we make sense of the world? We make sense of the world by giving it a term, giving it a name. Now, if that gets thrown out, then nothing's for certain, is it? Because I can decide to call myself whatever I want to call myself, but fundamentally, if I perform a function as a whatever you want to term a man as,
Like XY, the chromosomes
it's
difference.
on a chromosomal level,
yeah.
you're defined. And now we know, obviously, in terms of gender fluidity, of the sense of who you are in your body may not align with your chromosomal signature. We understand that, we get that. So you can be in a man's body, but identify as a woman because you think of yourself as a woman and you feel like you've been born into the wrong body. I get that 100%. I understand that. So it's how you then start to define these things out to then make sense of the world. And it'll be interesting over time how far that goes in respect of even those definitions not being sufficient. And then it just gets expanded out. That actually, I don't even identify as a human. I'm not a Homo sapien anymore.
That's the thing.
I'm an entity.
And I can clearly say now, look, at this point in time, you can pretty much, you can have your definitions for a man or a woman on chromosomes. You can say, look, this is a man, this is a woman. I'm talking about a much more longer term horizon where maybe these chromosomes are going to potentially merge. If the man's not using his, penis anymore, is it just going to shrivel up to nothing? Is a woman's ovaries, if they're not really using them, are these eventually going to end up like the sort of the coccyx in the back? Is your towel going to disappear? Parts of your brain are going to change. You're going to be so immersed with robotics. I'm just thinking, how is it going to be in the future, James? And it's just not going to be the same as it is now, is it? At all.
I mean, if the fundamental things that will kill you, and if those can be eradicated through merging with machines, if we can get into a system where it's almost like taking your car for an MOT, that something doesn't work, you take it out and replace it with something that's new, still organic, potentially, but it's a replacement. So then you can see how immortality potentially, because you're just taking things out and replacing them with a new part. Because there's the brain, for example, vascular dementia will kill you. Disease, cancer will kill you because it's a downstream effect of things breaking down. But if you can take that out and discard it and then put in one that's not infected.
And as soon as you can start creating, what they're doing, bringing back, I don't know if you see the wolves that they brought back. Was it the white wolf? I can't remember what it was called. But
reintroducing it back into the wild.
Yeah, they brought that back, the woolly mammoth from DNA. If you can start creating things in a, petri dish and you're recreating some type of sentience as well, then it throws up a real mind fuck, doesn't it? it really gets your mind thinking, like, and this is what we're talking about, James, from the beginning is, think bigger. First principles problem solving. Some of the obvious things that are right in front of our face is not necessarily working anymore, or you make assumptions on things that are not true. It's like you've got fixed beliefs on how things work or how things should be, and they might be the things that you need to question. Those assumptions are they real? Are they true? Well, are they evolving? And I think with this,
curiosity, isn't it? Curious mind.
you got to really keep your mind open, because it's changing in front of our eyes, whether we like it or not. And I think in the next 10 years, we're going to have to answer some real huge questions around how we evolve as a society, how we evolve and self-develop as people. And that crisis of meaning is going to be at the forefront of things. And, people are going to have to question so much about their beliefs and their lives. So that was a good one, James. That was
hour and a half, mate.
Yeah, we can chat forever on this type of stuff, can't we? But thanks, Louise, for commenting.
Good to have you on, Louise.
And fascinating conversation. Let us know what you think in the comments. But thanks for that, James.
You're very welcome, mate. Thank you.
Take care.
We agreed on some stuff then, didn't we?
I think we agreed on a lot of things. Things are
who knew?
Crazy times. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Much love.